It's been 11 years now. 11 years of suicide prevention. I'm Under Cabral. I'm your host today. I'd like to welcome everyone. Welcome to Read and Grow. Welcome to Path of Light Spiritist group of Long Branch. So I invite everyone right now to close our eyes, and this way we can get easier connected with our inner being, with our Father, and ask our Father, Mighty Father, have mercy on us. Bestow your blessings upon all of us gathered here right now in your name, in the name of our Master Jesus. We also ask your protection for this special event, the Suicide Prevention Workshop, which is celebrating today 11 years, and give us strength and courage, persistence to go on, to never give up, helping those who we know that we can help. But at the same time, our Father of love and infinite mercy, we beg you, have mercy on those who have already departed from this world through the suicide. We know, Father, that your love is infinite. So we definitely don't believe in the forever hell, forever suffering, because they are your children too. And we believe that your love is also available for them. So we beg you for them, Lord. Thank you. Before we go on with our program, I'd like first to recognize our mastermind of this event, Lucinette.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. It's a great pleasure to be between friends. And I think it would be great to talk about how this event starts. This event starts actually, the root starts over divine light. Julio was a January, we had a meeting about the tri-states, and towards the I knew that Julio was gonna do a presentation that day, and I said to Edward, let's stay, is Julio presenting? And he said, yeah, let's stay. And so he gave this beautiful presentation, sad but beautiful, with many details, and what's touched me the most was he spoke about that the rich countries had higher, that was the statistic at that year. The rich country had higher society than the poor countries. So towards the end of the presentation, I made a little reflections in my life, because it's impossible not to do while we see this presentation. And then I saw how many suicide I have in my family. And then our mentor said it would be nice if Long Island started this campaign. At the moment, I was a little bit in shock. He suggested. So I went home and I spoke to my former husband about it. And he said, well, I think we should. My mama just had committed suicide. That's how it started the event. The roots was in divine light. Then I called Jusara Corgo, Asher. She said, well, let's do it. It's a great opportunity for us to enter this subject. So our first suicide prevention was 9 people. Myself, my former husband, Jusara, my children, and João and Cristiane. And today we are here together, a different spirit center, family. That's who we are. We are family. And actually I have a beautiful news today. I spoke to a very dear friend, and that is a great opportunity that we're going to start a teenager suicide prevention. And again, this event is going to be the collaboration from all the Spirit Center. That's how is life. We cannot be alone. We need to be together, whether it is for work for Christ or during a hard time of difficulties and obstacles, and also happy times too, because those happy times is a moment of gratitude, and we must celebrate with our friends and our loved ones. Thank you so much for everyone who are here today. Humbly, we offer, it's open, this first center, the event. Whoever would like to host next year, let us know before the end of the event. If there is no one who would like to host this event next year, is going to be again in here, because the previous host is the one who holds until the next host appears and said, hey, would you like to do it? Thank you for today, and many blessings.
I just want to host the event next year in Manhattan.
Come here,
Don't need to go up.
come here.
It's a pleasure for us to participate with all you guys, and if Inner Enlightenment Spiritist Society in New York can do that, it would be an honor. Thank you.
See, I told you.
Yeah, the Spiritist group Path of Light is really honored with the presence of this event here today. We are talking about today suicide prevention, the invisible emotional pain explained by the Spiritism. As far as I can see, everybody here knows a little bit about the Spiritism, right? So is there anyone here that is completely strange to the concepts of Spiritism? Good. All right, excellent. It's interesting because it's hard for me to tell much about different things of the Spiritism, because I was born in the Spiritism. My mother and my father were already Spiritists when I was born. My name was given after André Luiz, the Spirit, because my mother was reading No Solar, the first book of the big harvest of André Luiz in the spiritual realm. And then, inspired by his name, she named me also André Luiz. So it's very easy to understand the Spiritism once we let the Spiritism get into our heart. We are all the same. We come, everybody, to this world the same, naked and scared, right? After that, the grand entry in this beautiful world, everything that happened to us is a result of our decisions. But one thing, one mission all of us have is to disincarnate better than we reincarnate, to die better than we were born. So this is number one, this is our priority. Fix ourselves first and then help others. Like I was joking about the oxygen mask, but that's true. First you put the mask in yourself and then you are ready to help others. Otherwise, everybody will be in trouble. So this bunch of weird people called the Spiritists, those who boring people, they don't drink, they don't speak bad words, they are always trying to make it right. It's weird, these people. So let's see in the concept of one of our fellow Spiritists that we love him, but unfortunately he couldn't make it here today. He's in California, Flavio Zanetti. So let's hear his word in what it's like to be a Spiritist.
It's an interesting question. What is it to be a Spiritist? I mean, what do you do differently from other people in the world? And it's an interesting one because oftentimes people don't realize that while Spiritism is not a religion per se, I call it as a body of knowledge, or this philosophy with moral consequences that really guides or gives us principles for us to direct our life. Yes, we all go to the Spiritist centers, we all listen to a talk or to a lecture, we learn from speakers, there's a vast library of books that we have access to. Yes, there are some therapies that we go through in the Spiritist center. So it is a temple, it is a religious institution, but the main difference that I see is there are no rituals. You don't have to go there, wear certain types of clothing or use certain types of vocabulary, right? You go there to be yourself. And as we go there to help others learn more about Spiritism, we oftentimes use concepts that we learned from Allan Kardec and also other folks that came after him that helped us with more knowledge, more information, more know-how, more access to other content that really helped solidify the message that Kardec himself wrote for us, right, in the 19th century. A lot of times people ask, hey, but what's the difference between, a Spiritist and a non-Spiritist, or a different, somebody that really professes a different type of religion or philosophy? I would say there's no difference at all. We follow, certain tenets of religions. We follow certain types of philosophies. A lot of the things that we learn through Spiritism are not things that are 100% new. They were there, they've been through humanity, but nobody, up to Kardec's point, stopped to research, to really put a method or a process in order to really bring that forward to humankind. I'll give you an example. Allan Kardec codified or created the word Spiritism, but the word reincarnation itself, right, which is the concept of us coming back to the physical life, it's something that's been around for thousands of years. So he did not really create the word reincarnation. Kardec himself invites us to challenge, to question, to talk about things that we learn and that we hear in Spiritist centers. If you read something, that something doesn't really make sense to us, Spiritism invites us to question that, to challenge it, until we are comfortable and really conscientious about that knowledge. To me, this is amazing, because it's not something that's indoctrinated into you, it's the other way around. It invites us to really go after more knowledge. It invites us to go after and to develop ourselves as human beings, to treat others with more respect, to really see others as part of our own family, things that in the past weren't so. To really have a very moral, law-abiding or moral-abiding citizens in every step of the way, in our workplace, with our families, with our friends, in every way, every setting that you go, you are a Spiritist. So to me, that's what it is to be a Spiritist. It's always working hard to be better today than I was yesterday, and to be better tomorrow than I am today. It's someone that's always working hard to really move away my imperfections, to really work on my difficulties, to be a better husband, a better wife, a better son, a better daughter, a better friend, a better boss, or a better employee. As I mentioned before, in every step of the way, in every setting that we belong or we participate, we're trying to do better. One day at a time, in a constant path towards the future. To me, that's what it is to be a Spiritist.
Thank you, Flavio. Last night, another friend of ours, Melissa Dillon, she wrote also a message for this event, and I'd like to read its letters here. How raising awareness helps suicide prevention efforts. There's a stigma around suicide that needs to be overcome to help those who are considering attempting suicide, as well as their friends and loved ones. It is a topic that most people don't want to talk about, but it's being found that raising awareness helps suicide prevention efforts. Understanding the facts and having open and honest conversation might help save a life. Over 47,000 people died by suicide in the United States in 2019. A number, and let alone the 2020, a number that increases every year. Of those who committed suicide, 1 in 5 had expressed their intent to someone in their life. Knowing the risk factors is a key piece of the awareness that can contribute to prevention efforts. For that, we need to be informed and we need your help. Now, recently we asked a few testimonies, and I brought here 3 special kids. I'm saying kids because these kids that you guys gonna see now, they were kind of born in a Spiritist center as well. They grew up from the gospel for children from very small very early age, and today they are in college and they are teaching to the kids in the Spiritist Center the same principles that they learned some years ago. First, we're going to have a Kayan Chavez from Denver, Connecticut.
Hey, my name is Kayan. I'm part of the Alan Kardec Spiritist Center, and we're starting off with what I believe Spiritism is to me. And to me, Spiritism is a whole lot of things, and mainly it's about talking to people and having that person who'll support you and who's like around you, and not being afraid to talk whenever you need any help. And to me, that connects a lot to suicide prevention, because you always have someone to talk to with Spiritism. Let it be your friends or your community or God himself, and or whatever you believe God to be. But that has a lot to do with, you know, finding yourself and just being able to express how you feel. So yeah. So personally, I've had someone who has had thoughts of, you know, about suicide and things like that. And personally for me, what I do is just try to be there for them. You know, I talk to them, ask them, you know, what they're feeling emotionally, why they feel these types of things. I try to get them out of the, you know, comfortable area, because I feel like that's what strains someone to be upset. They crowd themselves in something like a small space, and they're too comfortable, they're too crowded with things in their head, so you got to pull them out of where they are to get them in other places. So I think that's one of the things that I've done to help someone who's had thoughts of suicide. So yeah.
The next kid, right? It's in about the same situation. He's a college student, and he was also grown in the Spiritist harvest.
To me, Spiritism is more of a lifestyle than a religion. It's a place and a concept that ties people together in large and small communities where we all come together, and people can be free to be who they are and share what they want to share and talk about their feelings, as well as learn and improve on ourselves. And if there's any difficulties in life or anything, you know, that you don't feel like sharing with other people, you can feel safe and commune with anybody here, and everybody will try to support you as much as possible. We have had people who've tried to who've shared with us in our community, and not even just in my immediate area, but whether it's someone from here in Connecticut or New Jersey, or when we have the bigger groups and we have people from all over the world, we all seem to come together and help out anybody who may have feelings of, you know, wanting to end their life, or they're, you know, depressed, anything like that. Even the smallest things, everyone loves to help out anybody who shares. And it's important to know that in our beliefs, we don't think you know, the whole cycle of life ends at just this one physical body. So we always try to push each other, you know, to better levels, better mental states, and just all in all, pushing on, living your current life to the fullest, and staying healthy. And then when you move on to the next, do the same and just keep improving and get better in the next one.
And the next kid, it's a very cute little kid too. We asked the same question that we asked to these two kids. What is the effect of Spiritism in your life, and how can we use that knowledge to prevent suicide? It's our friend Bia Lopez.
Hi everyone, I'm Bia. Growing up in Spiritism has been so important to me because it has given me so many tools and knowledge to face all the challenges that have come in my life and I know are to come, as we are in a world of trials and atonements. With suicide prevention, I think knowing Spiritism is so important, because when we have the understanding of life after this life, it helps us to better understand why we're going through what we're going through, how we can handle it, and the best ways to handle it. And knowing that even though we're struggling right now, there is better times to come.
I just would like to acknowledge the presence of Pia. Is here with us. Not as much as a kid, right? And I couldn't resist. I asked her just to give us a quick word, just to say hello to us.
Hi everyone, I'm a little short, so I'll be on my toes. But yeah, no, thank you for having me here. And growing up in the Spiritist Center has really meant the world to me. And I know as teens and as youth, they might be hesitant to be at the center. They might not want to go, but the lessons do reach their minds and they do affect their lives. And yeah, and it's been really nice to be involved in Spiritism, and I'm glad that now, after college, well, during college, I went to Sandro in Long Island, so I got the chance to meet Busi and be involved with this event, and now I'm happy that after college I'm back at my Sandro and I can spread this to other teenagers that are going through the same challenges that we all go through. Thank you.
So now we are going to hear our friend Peter Hicks. A quick word about Peter. He's a worker at Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey, where he has been an active participant for 20 years, 2 decades. Peter is also a member and supporter of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, and since 2021 he has served on the board of directors of the United States Spiritist Federation. He has done several talks at several Spiritist centers in different states. He also loves to play the guitar, just like me, and has been teaching children at his center for several years. He's going to talk to us today examples of emotional pain and how to relieve them. So let's welcome Peter Hicks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be here in front of all of you. So today's workshop is focusing on invisible emotional pain as explained by Spiritism. The fact that we have emotional pain, and all of us have some kind of emotional pain, I think one way Spiritism would explain that is that it's a trial. In chapter 5 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, Blessed are the Afflicted, it touches on some of the emotional difficulties we have. It mentions suicide. And all the sufferings that we go through can be connected to various kinds of trials. So what is the purpose of having the trial of emotional pain, regardless of what kind of pain it is? The answer, and this is a quick, short one, is that we need to find a way to have more consciousness about what kind of emotional pains we have. The purpose of psychology is to work on developing consciousness so that we begin to understand some of our negativity, and we all have it, so that it doesn't push us around. But that is, of course, the challenge. What if we're not aware of it? Well, I decided to focus on what is called step 1 of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm familiar with alcoholism because there were members of my family who suffered from it. One did certainly committed suicide, not directly, but essentially did. And that's not really the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. But the reason I mention this is because step 1 of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous says the following. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, suppose we think of it that way in regards to emotional pain. So how about this? We admitted we were powerless over our emotional pain, that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, are we always powerless with our emotional pain? Not necessarily, but sometimes we are. Sometimes because we don't have a lot of awareness, sometimes emotional pain can be very, very intense. And therefore, the more we begin to pay attention to it, the more we can begin to free ourselves from it. But what do we mean by emotional pain? What is that exactly? Well, what I'm going to do is spend a fair amount of time with this book, which is called Healing Emotional Pain Workbook. This was put together by a team of psychologists. Many of them are connected to UC Berkeley, happens to be the university of my hometown. And what they do is they identify many examples of emotional pain. So what I'm going to go through is a bit of a speed through, but it is based on science and modern psychology's understanding of what emotional pain is. And there's a wonderful quote in this book that I'd like to share with you guys, which is, "Our minds have one job, to help us survive threats." Well, yes, and the way in which we cope with the problems that we have, well, they may not be very effective. And that's what can get us into trouble. Yes, our mind is designed to help us survive threats, but the way in which we try to survive those threats may be ineffective. It may be temporary. We may be putting a Band-Aid over a problem, but we're not really dealing with the problem itself. And this book talks about ineffective coping mechanisms. There are 11 of them. Each chapter in this book deals with a particular ineffective coping mechanism, and then it offers some ways in which to go about relieving it. Why am I doing this? Because again, I mentioned that Spiritism, I think, would see emotional pain as a trial we need to go through. Everything we go through is some kind of trial, some kind of struggle. And if the goal is to try to have consciousness, well, how do we do that? Well, here's some techniques for how we can begin to do that. And again, this is just an overview. But here's the first one. First ineffective coping technique is behavioral avoidance. We avoid situations or activities that make us feel nervous, afraid, guilty, ashamed, or feel like a failure. Number two, next one is safety seeking. We tend to rely too much on habitual safety-seeking actions. Here's an example. Let's say, hypothetically, that I have a presentation to do in front of all of you today. Not that that would ever happen. And let's say the way I handle that is I'm going to rehearse, I don't know, 25, 35 times. That might be a bit much, yes? The theory is I'm trying to somehow prepare myself in a way of avoiding the possibility that maybe I'm going to make mistakes, or maybe things are not going to work out. But another version of safety seeking is that we also would avoid being honest with people because we're afraid of creating a problem. We might, stir the pot with somebody in some way. In other words, we, God forbid, might be honest with them. There might be a problem. And the thing is, so we avoid that. It's safety seeking, but we also are suffering as a result. So it's a coping mechanism in which, in the long run, we continue to pay the price for it. The third one is emotion-driven behavior. We feel bad about something, so we tend to automatically act in ways that prolong the painful feelings. And of course, that makes them worse. So if we feel depressed, for instance, we may shut down. We may withdraw from everyone and everything. Another way of being involved in emotional-driven behavior is we may be the kind of person that spaces out. They call it disassociation. And so, but then another possibility is that we, in the process, become very angry. Now, the theory of getting angry is, well, I'm going to blow off some steam and then the anger goes away. But if we're not dealing with the cause of the anger very effectively, then what's happening is we get angry, we blow off steam, then we get angry again and again and again and again. And so we get into this cycle, and it becomes a bit of a trap. The fourth one is called distress intolerance. We struggle with feelings that become overwhelming. So we feel stressed by a situation. We have strong reactions that make us feel besieged and unstable. So the smallest thing could be terribly overwhelming to us. And when we feel we can't cope with situations like this, or we might even just deny that they're happening altogether, or we do not know how to cope with these painful experiences as we're feeling them. The fifth one, by the way, there is a lot of overlap in all these. It's not like they're all neat little categories. You can have a blend of a few of these at once. Emotional avoidance, number 5. We avoid difficult situations such as sadness or anger by masking and suppressing feelings altogether. So if I come across all of you like I'm very serene, I'm very peaceful, I'm a spiritist, everything is fine, we must keep our thoughts elevated, but underneath that I'm like really upset and pissed off and I'm not being very honest. And what I'm doing is basically avoiding the real feelings that I have. In other words, part of being a good spiritist, my friends, is it's okay to have those moments where we get angry, where we have that negativity, because, as we all know, none of us are saints, none of us are perfect. So, of course, we're going to have moments of weakness, probably on a daily basis. Well, not me, of course, all of you. So we might find ways, part of emotional avoidance is that we might find ways to distract ourselves. Again, spacing out, disassociating. Thought avoidance is we may find ways to avoid difficult, painful thoughts. We try to replace them with other thoughts or activities, but again, the thoughts come back to us anyways. Then there's cognitive misappraisals. This is where, when we feel stressed out, we're in a stressful situation, we tend to react by having an inaccurate, negative thought about the situation. In other words, we misinterpret what has happened or what's going on, and that tends to make the situation worse. I'm going to come back to this one in a little bit. Another one is self-blame. This is where we tend to internalize. We blame ourselves for the situations that we're going through, usually because we have low self-esteem. So we may go through life or tend to have the reaction of, it's my fault, I am to blame, I am stupid, I am a loser, I am a foolish. Depending upon the kind of childhood we had, we may have developed this kind of coping mechanism very early on. Suppose we grew up in a very toxic, abusive household. We may not understand what's going on and immediately go, well, it's my fault. If we tend to judge people with the idea that it's your fault, you are to blame, you are a loser, that is really bad, right? It's not good. And it's painful, but imagine when we're doing that to ourselves. And of course, when we talk about suicide, this is one of those emotional pains that if it really deepens and gets prolonged, it can lead to suicide. Blaming others is the opposite. This is where, of course, we blame everyone when things go wrong. We tend to be impatient, we avoid painful feelings, and more importantly, we don't take responsibility for them, let alone how to resolve the problem. So it's another form of avoidance, but it's pushing everything outward. It's not my fault something happened, it's essentially your fault. And as long as we all agree it's your fault, then everything's fine. So people like this, it's a form of self-righteous behavior. In other words, we're inherently right. And it can lead to chronic anger and feelings of hopelessness. It can also be the kind of behavior that leads to lost relationships. We could have trouble being in intimate relationships if we tend to blame the other person all the time, or we blame people who are our friends. And if we keep having these kind of automatic, chronic psychological responses of it's everyone else's fault, this also is the kind of emotion that can lead to a lot of health problems. Many of the examples I've given so far can lead to health problems if they are chronic and we don't really have a great deal of self-awareness about them. 10 out of 11. The next two are 10 focuses on worry, and then 11 is rumination, and they are related to each other. When we worry, of course, we're worrying a lot about the future. We tend to be very preoccupied with outcomes that have not occurred, obsessing about the future in some way. We're not really living in the present. And the past we don't reflect on too much. We're kind of fixated on negative outcomes which have not even occurred yet. So these become a kind of cycle in which we can get ourselves involved in. And then the opposite of that would be rumination, where we tend to spend a lot of time worrying and obsessing about the past, ruminate about the past. And so when something bad happens, we immediately start thinking, who was at fault? Was it us? Was it somebody else? It's a form of negative judgment. So it's possibly similar to blaming others. Or it may be a combination of we're blaming ourselves. But whatever it is, we're kind of worrying about somebody's to blame, whether it's me or you. When we blame others, and we do this constantly, and we judge people, of course it's examples of anger. And when we do that, it can also lead to depression. A lot of times depression is, when we're constantly judging ourselves or judging others, it can be underneath all of that, signs of depression. So these are all ineffective coping mechanisms. Again, this is based on research, and as I mentioned and as you saw, there was a lot of overlap between the two of them. And I'm going to focus on this one in a little more detail, focus on some examples and so forth. This is chapter 7 from this book, which is again called Cognitive Misappraisals. And this is the one where, when we're in stressful situations, we tend to have inaccurate interpretations about what's going on. And here's an example. Suppose, hypothetically of course, we misplace our cell phone. Not that this ever happens, but we misplace our cell phone. What is the reaction we might have in a cognitive misappraisal? Oh no, I can't live without my cell phone, oh my God. It's like, my life is over, what am I going to do? That kind of response, right? Rather than thinking, well, okay, where did I last see that cell phone? I was doing such and such. Or maybe we can use the tracking device that's available to find your cell phone. No, we immediately go to, I can't live without my cell phone. It's as if we're saying to the world, my life is over. How long ago was it when we didn't even have cell phones? I mean, I remember the rotary phone. That's what I used when I was a kid. So it's like, it's rather funny, but nevertheless, we might become very attached to a situation like this, which in the grand scheme of things is not a big deal. But there's an expression in psychology where you're putting $10,000 worth of emotion into a 5-cent problem. And I think misplacing our cell phone can be a nuisance, an inconvenience, especially if we're in a rush, but is it like the end of the world? But we feel that way, and then we may tend to want to blame ourselves. So in in cognitive misappraisals, part of what's happening here is it's the way that we're interpreting the event, not the event itself. And we tend to misinterpret events typically in ways that are very inflexible. So one of the key behaviors and components of cognitive misappraisals is that we are inflexible. It must be this, it must be that kind of approach to life. And this, of course, can create a lot of stress and a lot of difficult emotions. So how do we begin to relieve something like this? I'm going to spend a little time, once I get the thing to go. Oh no, I didn't keep up with the advances. My life is over. Pardon me a moment. So there's an example of a woman named Janice, who was a mother of 2 school-aged children. And she and her husband ran a struggling motel in a small southwestern town. Her oldest son, Jimmy, had a severe learning disability, very important to keep that in mind, And here are some typical entries from what's called a thought journal. You see, this book on healing emotional pain is a workbook. And there are forms, and the purpose of these forms is to simply focus on how do I react to certain emotional situations. And the first thing the book does is it asks you a bunch of questions. You have to answer them as honestly as you can, like on a scale of 1 to 5. Do I tend to do this? How much do I do this? And then based upon the score you have, it then directs you to certain areas of the book. So she did what's called a thought journal, in which this woman recorded how she responded to certain situations that were going on in her family. So here's an example of that. One situation, the situation is like when, where, who, what happened, and so forth. So the first situation that occurred with her is that her son Jimmy, the one with the learning disability, tore up his workbook, book report after we spent an hour on it. So the question then is, well, what were her feelings? The feelings was she had to rate her feelings on a scale of 1 to 100. 0 meaning this didn't bother me at all, I didn't really have much of a reaction to it, to 100 where I have a very serious reaction to something. So what was her reaction? Furious, 70 out of 100. So pretty strong. She was pretty angry at him. Hopeless, kind of even, but nevertheless it was up there. And then the next reaction is what we call automatic thoughts. What was she thinking the moment the situation happens? The way she interpreted her son tearing up the book report was, he hates me, he did it on purpose to hurt me. And then the other thought she had is, he'll never make it in this world. So already she has had these are what are called automatic thoughts. And these are examples of cognitive misappraisals. Here's another situation. Again, she and her husband run a motel, right? A kind of business where the profit margins are kind of tight, so every amount of money they spend matters. And this is a family that's struggling, okay, so they have their own business. 2 air conditioners died the same day, and another one is barely working. So how did she respond to that? She became worried, not just a little bit worried, very worried, 90 out of 100. And then what was her automatic thought on that one? We already owe the HVAC guy. HVAC is an air conditioning system and people who work on it. So they already owed money. And her other thought is, we can't afford new ones. And then her other immediate thought, automatic thought, was, we're going to lose the motel. It's basically saying, that's it, we're done, and so forth. Here's another example. Her husband buys 3 new AC units on a credit card. So the AC units were broken, he went out and he got them on a credit card. How did she react to that? Angry, 85 out of 100. So she was really upset. Why? Because, again, money's tight, he bought them on a credit card. So her automatic responses, her automatic thoughts were, fool, he ruined us. The other thought she had was, we're going to be homeless. That's it, we're done, end of story. Again, similar thought, we'll lose the business. So again, the point of this is that this is how she processed the situation. This was her first impulse. These are, again, examples of cognitive misappraisals. She's misjudging the situation. But I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the next category, which is called limited thinking pattern, because part of understanding cognitive misappraisal is to understand what kind of thinking pattern we might tend to have. So in this instance, there are 8 types of limited thinking patterns. And the first one is what we call filtering. That's basically where we just focus on the negative details and we ignore the positive. The second one is polarizing thinking. That's where everything is black and white. The third one is overgeneralization. And that's where general conclusions are based on a single incident. So we tend to exaggerate the frequency of problems, or we tend to use what are called negative global labels. The second one is mind reading. I'm sure this one's everyone's favorite one to do. We think we know what others are thinking and feeling. None of you have ever done that, right? No. I know I haven't, right? I'm glad we're all agreed about that. The fifth one, the limited thinking pattern, is catastrophizing. This one is where we expect disaster. That's immediate impulse. We respond to a problem by asking, what if this happens? What if disaster strikes? My wife and I may go out and have dinner tonight. What if we get into a car accident? No, we better stay home just to be safe. So it becomes a way of justifying not doing certain things, not taking a risk. Is there a chance we get into a car accident? Yes, of course, but how likely is that to occur? But we don't think that way. We think of, oh my God, we're going to get into a car accident. Let's stay home tonight, okay? Another is magnifying. This one's kind of the high drama one. We exaggerate the degree or intensity of a problem. And then number 7 is personalization, where we assume that everything people do or say is some kind of reaction to us. This is another favorite one, right? It's all about me. Anytime anyone does something, anytime someone says something, makes a certain facial gesture, it's a judgment on me in some way. It involves me somehow. This is what happened to our friend Janice. Her son Jimmy tore up the book report, and her reaction was, he did it to me. He hates me. He's trying to provoke me. As if he's conscious of, I want to make mom angry, so I'm going to tear up the book report. So, but another form of personalization is that little habit that I know none of us ever do, which is where we compare ourselves to others. We try to determine who's smarter, who's competent, who's better looking, and so forth. So the habit of comparing ourselves to people is again a way of us, it's all about me in some way, but it's us dealing with our insecurities, and we tend to play it out that way. I'm having the fun task here of operating this, which is not connected to that, so that's what I'm kind of looking back at the time. But anyway, the last category of limited thinking pattern is what we call having the shoulds. This is where we have ironclad rules about how you and other people should react. People should do this, people must do that, that kind of thing. And so when people break the rules, as it were, it makes us really, really angry. And you feel guilty, and we feel guilty when we violate the rules. So if we've had these rigid rules, and somebody else is kind of, tell me if I have this right, Genshin Brasileiro, that kind of thing. Yeah, so you sort of bend the rules a little bit. Well, if I feel you cannot bend the rules, and I get really upset about that, that's an example of should. You shouldn't bend the rules. So then I get all bent out of shape. And this, again, causes a lot of emotional stress. Again, all of these behaviors within this category of cognitive misappraisals is about inflexible behavior. Things must be a certain way. So let's go back to our friend Janice. You remember I mentioned her son Jimmy tore up the book report, and that she got angry and she felt hopeless. He did it to me, and so forth. So what was her limited thinking pattern in this one? Well, personalization, as I mentioned before, and then the other was catastrophizing. She catastrophized the situation by the worst possible outcome. My son will never make it in this world. How does she know this? But that was her first impulse in this. Okay, let's go to the next one. What about the one where her husband bought the 3 new AC units on a credit card? She was very angry. He's a fool. He's going to ruin us. We're going to be homeless. All this stuff. We're going to lose the business. So what is this about? Again, catastrophizing. So Janice happens to be the sort of person in which catastrophizing is one of her first impulses. There's a couple of other examples that we haven't gone over yet. The first one is that she made her son Jimmy cry by pushing him too hard on his math problems. Remember, he has a learning disability, so he struggles with processing certain information. I grew up being told I had a learning disability. I can tell you, it was very frustrating. And I often grew up feeling like I was stupid, and I had a lot of anger about it at times, I must say. I won't go into it right now, it's not the point. But nevertheless, it is, it's very frustrating when you feel like, something like working on math could be very overwhelming for her son. But she was pushing him, and she made him cry, and he got frustrated. So how did she react to it? What were her feelings? She felt ashamed, very ashamed. And then what was her other reaction? Her automatic thought was, I'm a failure as a mother, I'm blowing it. So what limited thinking pattern is this one? Shoulds. I should not fail as a mother, I must be perfect. I cannot blow it. Have any of you ever heard of a parent who did not make mistakes? How many of you are parents? Can you honestly say you've never made a mistake ever with your kids? I don't think so. So, but she has this rigid perception of herself that she must somehow not blow it as a parent. What did she do? She made her son cry. The world is over. It's that kind of thing. Here's another example we haven't gone over yet. She goes to a bank. The loan officer kept me waiting, then rushed me, wouldn't let me finish a sentence. So what was her feelings to that one? Angry, about 50 out of 100, and she was very nervous, 75 out of 100. What was her automatic thought pattern in this one? Her automatic thought pattern is, she can tell I'm desperate, she feels contempt and pity for us. That was one. The other was, she's supposed to help, not hinder. So her automatic thought pattern was mind reading. She was trying to interpret the intentions of the loan officer. She knows I'm nervous. How would the loan officer know that she's nervous? Maybe, maybe not, but that was her first impulse. Again, she's internalizing what reality is. She's misunderstanding the situation. And then the other response she had, because the loan officer was late and was kind of pushing her and not letting her speak too much, is she's supposed to help me, not hinder. There's a little bit of blame going on in that one. But she feels this feeling that, she must do this. Now, let's go back and look at the limited thinking patterns. I'm going to review these again, but now I'm going to show you some other ways of coping with some of these limited thinking patterns. So the first one was filtering. Remember, that's the one where we only focus on the negative details and ignore the positive. So the technique that we can use is that we do focus on the positive, and we look at how do we solve a problem rather than just obsessing about the problem itself. It's like the missing cell phone. I lost the cell phone, oh my God, my life is over. If all I do is think about, oh my God, my life is over, I can't live without my cell phone, and I get into a loop like this, and Spiritists would understand that as probably a little bit of signs of obsession going on, but whatever it is, we're not pulling ourselves out of the situation by going, how do I solve this problem, rather than, oh my God, I have the problem, okay? So, but then there are other ways of focusing only on the negative. For example, we tend to see people as stupid and incompetent. Everyone at the place I work at is stupid and incompetent. Well, the way to address that, or to try to go in a different direction to relieve that, is to simply ask, well, what qualities do they have that we do approve of? My grandfather was very involved in business, and he said, never say anything negative about somebody unless you can say something positive about them too. Again, we may observe that people don't do things very well, but are they like that 100% of the time? Is that fair? Is that accurate? No. How could it be? So again, it's just taking the step of rethinking our automatic response and questioning the limited thinking pattern that we have. So here's polarized thinking. Again, that's the one where everything is black and white. So the technique there is we simply begin to realize that human beings are too complex to be either or. But how often do we sometimes go through life with this attitude that people are this or they are that? How easy or how tempting is it to generalize about people frequently and only focus on the negative in that response? So instead of polarizing judgments, we can think about percentages. Okay, the people where I work don't support me. I never am supported by the people at work. Well, what percentage of that is really true? 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, maybe 60%? You see, when we start thinking about it in terms of realistic percentages, then the idea that they don't support me, we're trying to put it a little more into reality. We're not just assuming they never, ever support me. That's probably, that's highly unlikely. So again, we're looking at the problem and pulling back from it. Overgeneralization, the general conclusion based on the single incident. So this is the one where we exaggerate frequency of problems or use negative global labels. So the technique can be that we quantify instead of words like, so we avoid using words like this situation is huge, this problem is awful, this is a massive problem, and so forth. And again, part of the technique of this is that we ask ourselves, how much evidence do we really have for something? Because again, cognitive misappraisal is about us misinterpreting the event. So what evidence are we basing our conclusions on about a particular situation or the people that we're in, like our family, when we're looking at the intentions of family members or the intentions of our friends or colleagues at work and so forth? How much evidence do we really have that we're basing our interpretation of the situation on? But also, along these lines, is we have to think about language. We can avoid absolutes like, all people do such and such. People are always like this. Do I have any support? None at all. I never get this right. Everybody hates me. Things like, nobody understands me. You see, these are all absolute words, and if we start to say or try to avoid these types of words that we use to define what's going on around us, again, we're pulling away from this inflexible behavior. So we can replace things like may. People may be unsupportive at the moment. Sometimes people are not very fair at work, or often people are not fair at work. Okay, maybe we work in a place where people are not very fair, but we say often, which means what? Not 100% of the time. So again, we're starting to minimize the effects of this limited thinking pattern. And along these lines is that we should be careful about negative predictions. One would be like, no one will ever love me. Look at how this sentence is phrased. We may go through life thinking this way, no one will ever love me. How do we know this? How do we know it? And yet, this kind of attitude, no one will ever love me, well, that can be really hurtful. That can lead to a lot of despair if we really believe that. So we have to ask ourselves, is that really an honest appraisal of what's going on? The fourth one, again, was mind reading. So how do we cope with this? We think we know what others are thinking and feeling. Well, it's better to avoid making inferences about people at all. Again, we always have to be careful. Another way to describe this is projection. We tend to project onto others, I think I know what your intentions are. I look at the way some of you are looking at me and I know what you're thinking. It's that kind of thing, right? Well, it's better we give the situation the benefit of the doubt. I have no idea what you're thinking. So if I wonder what you're thinking, then what I can do is ask, just check in with somebody. Well, what if that's not possible? What if we can't check with somebody? Then can we at least maybe come up with some more positive reasons for why something may be going on or why somebody may be behaving a certain way? Can we think of some of the positive reasons and not just dwell on the negative ones? The fifth one, again, categorizing. This is 5 out of 8. We expect disaster and we respond to the problem. Again, this is where we worry, what if disaster strikes? Well, needless to say, this can create a lot of anxiety. So we could ask ourselves, again, what are the odds of something happening? If I'm terrified to go out to dinner with my wife because I think we're going to get into a car accident, what are the odds of that? Is it 100% unlikely? Well, yes, unfortunately, it could always happen. But how likely is it? I mean, how many times do we go out anywhere in a car and we're fine? We get from point A to point B and we don't crash. The odds of us getting into an accident are what? Maybe 5%, 3%, 1%, half of 1%. It's probably very low, especially if we're paying attention. So again, it's an attempt to put our fears into some kind of reality, which is the next point. Again, a more realistic picture. So magnifying, again, this is the high drama one. We expect disaster, and what if this happens? What if a disaster strikes? So we can handle that by avoiding words like something is terrible, something is awful, something is disgusting, something is horrendous, and so forth. And we can avoid phrases like, I can't stand it, or this situation is impossible, it's unbearable. We work in centers and we have logistics to deal with. Oh, this is impossible, I can't handle this is too much. Those kinds of feelings. Well, they may be annoyances, but are they really unbearable? And there's an interesting quote in this book which I'd like to share with you. You can stand it because history shows that human beings can survive almost any psychological blow and can endure incredible pain. So what if we go through life realizing that we're a lot more resilient than we give ourselves credit for, right? So we have to, again, put these things into some kind of reality. Personalization, again, that's the one where everything people do or say is a reaction to me, that one. So, or the habit of comparing ourselves to everyone. That person's better looking than I am, that person's more confident than I am, that person's going to succeed and I'm not going to succeed, those kinds of comparisons. Well, if we start comparing ourselves to others, we're already looking for an excuse to demoralize ourselves. This book points that out to us. So we have to be, obviously, it's one of those behaviors to really not get entrapped by. And I like this quote, human beings are too complex for casual comparisons to have any meaning. Some of that's based on scientific evidence. Again, human beings are too complex for casual comparisons to have any meaning. So when we feel that urge to compare ourselves to someone, how well do we know that person? How well do we know ourselves? So why are we doing this? And what does it say about us that we have this impulse? So again, if we think realistically that, okay, so-and-so does this a little better than me, well, who says that really matters in the grand scheme of things? The last one is the shoulds. We have a list of ironclad rules about you and other people should act, how they should act. Well, again, here we can think about language. Can we avoid using words like people should do this, people ought to do that, people must do that? Again, this is very rigid thinking. And so if we put words like this into our common vocabulary and don't even question it, then we start locking ourselves into a thought pattern that can create a lot of unhappiness, among other things. So one way to handle this is if we have certain rules. People should always be polite, always be polite. They can never be rude. Can we think of exceptions where people might be rude? And can we think of exceptions where we might respond a little bit differently? So the idea is that when we want to make these sweeping generalizations about the way people ought to behave, can we think of exceptions to that? Again, just to remind you all, this is a way of freeing ourselves from this inflexible, rigid thinking. I want to also share with you a really nice quote from this book. You may get irritated when people don't act according to your values, but your personal values are just that, personal. They may work for you, but as missionaries have discovered all over the world, they don't always work for others. So just to spell this out, missionaries meaning like people, say just Christians, going into communities where there aren't many Christians and they're trying to help everyone. And they discover what? Well, maybe not everyone has the same orientation or belief system as I do. I think Spiritism is the best thing since sliced bread, and I'm going to go into a community and convince everybody to be a Spiritist, because they have to understand what this beautiful philosophy, religion, and science is all about. Well, suppose their orientation is completely different. So do I have the ability to be flexible about who am I really dealing with? This goes on to say that people aren't all the same. Surprise, surprise, but how often do we want everybody to be the same? The key is to focus on each person's uniqueness, their particular needs, limitations, fears, and pleasures, because it is impossible to know all these complex interrelations, even with intimate partners. You can't be certain whether your values apply to another. You are entitled to an opinion, but allow for the possibility of being wrong. So what's that about? That's about humility. Also allow for other people to find different things important. So can we go through life appreciating that others certainly do think the same way? We can't be control freaks as much as we might like to be, and that we have to accept other people for who they really are. That is not certainly the key to having a successful relationship, both, the most intimate relationships we're in, but also with our casual relationships. Do we appreciate people for who they are, not the way we want them to be? So there's a huge difference. So I'm starting to wrap up, and we're going to go back to Janice's thought journal. And again, this was the example that Jimmy tore up his book report after we spent an hour on it. She'd gotten really angry, and he did this to me on purpose, and so forth. So what was the balanced alternative thought that she had? She spent some time thinking about how else can I respond to this situation besides my automatic thought. And she came up with the following. Rather than, he hates me, he did it on purpose, she thought, he's frustrated, he can't help it. And then she went a little further. Don't take it personally. Okay? And then, I like this one. She said, just hold him tight. Sometimes he just needs a hug. And then, rather than thinking he'll never make it in the world, because how does she know this? She goes the opposite way. He'll find his place in life. So, again, she's questioning her automatic impulse. What is this about? This is about consciousness. Again, the purpose of having emotional pain of any kind is to learn how to free ourselves from it. Spiritism talks about that. Know thyself, how to have consciousness, how to focus. So this book is showing ways in which we can actively take the time to work on paying attention to the kinds of thoughts and impulses that we have, and spend time questioning if this thought that I'm having is really an accurate thought, or can I think a little bit differently, rather than just getting into an automatic mindset. So let's go back to the husband buys 3 AC units on the credit card. And again, her reaction was, oh my God, the family business is over, that's it, we're done. And she catastrophized it. So how did she come up with a balanced thought? She looked at what her husband did, and she thought, okay, he was doing his best. He thought we needed to fix the AC units. After all, people complain about those things in a motel, so it's better to get the problem solved. That's what he was trying to do. And then she looks at the positive in this. Rather than, oh my God, we're in debt for the rest of our lives, she said, at least they were on sale. Yeah, good. So my husband's not so stupid after all. It's reassuring. And then she also remembered a very important point. This is her husband, after all. We love each other. Do we or do we not go through life, if we're with spouses, getting a little annoyed with each other? No, I know this never happens to you. It never happens to me. I mean, come on. No. Okay. But even when these things occur, do we remember that we still love one another? Yes? What about our friends? We still respect one another. I still care about this person, even when we get upset with each other. The world won't come to an end. That's it. Okay. And then she also looks at the situation realistically. Okay, he spent money on a credit card, high interest rates. It's going to take a while to pay this one off, but we're far from homeless. So she was trying to put this problem into more of a reality. Okay. What about this one, where she made her son Jimmy cry by pushing him too hard on his math problems? Again, she felt ashamed, I'm a failure as a mother, and so forth. I should have done this, I should have done that. But then when she thought about balancing her alternative thought pattern, she said, I'm doing my best in a hard situation. So she was giving herself a little bit of credit. She was trying to forgive herself, and we all need to know how to forgive ourselves, right? And she also realized, look, I don't abuse or neglect him. I made him cry. I wish I hadn't done that, but it's not like I am chronically abusing my kid or anything like that. So she's trying to put her behavior towards her son in a more realistic context. And then the last one. Again, she goes to the bank for the loan. The loan officer's late, kept her waiting, wouldn't let her finish a sentence. She got angry, she felt nervous, she projected or mind read it, and she knows that I'm desperate, this loan officer, she can read every thought that I'm having, that kind of thing, right? So how did she, when she looked at a balancing or alternative thought, she looked at the loan officer instead of herself and said, well, she's obviously busy, so it's not just about me after all. And then she is honest with herself. I admit I was rambling. So Janice is the kind of person who has trouble articulating herself clearly. She may take, 10 minutes to explain a point that she could have made in 3, that sort of thing. And she realizes that. And then she comes up with, I think this next comment is she came up with a solution. Next time I'll put it all in writing. Some of us have trouble expressing ourselves, right? We ramble, we go here and we go there and so forth. So maybe if we just write out the main points we want to make, especially if we're nervous, then we can provide a solution to a source of anxiety. But again, the point is that Janice is beginning to look inward, but not just inward. She's looking inward in a different way. She's looking at her automatic thoughts. She identified her limited thinking pattern in all of this, and then she came up with some other ways about how she could respond and to put things in a different context. Oops. Okay, so to summarize, the whole point of what I was trying to explain to you is, again, when we try to identify our emotional pain, what we're really doing is pulling ourselves back and we're kind of objectifying our emotional pain. Objectifying means we're not living within it completely, we're pulling back and looking at the impulse that we automatically have. And then that's the way we can begin to try and transcend these things. And it's important to keep in mind that even if we're working on, say, very conscious, deliberate exercises that focus on our emotional pains, our efforts to overcome this, we're not going to resolve this by next week. This may take months, even years, but at least we're trying. And this is something that Spiritism emphasizes all the time, that our progress happens slowly. And part of the point of going through progress and trying to change is that we also have to be patient and forgiving of ourselves and free ourselves of very rigid, inflexible behavior about this. Again, psychology is based on consciousness. I'll repeat. The point of psychology in general, the point of focusing on our emotional pain, is that we have to be honest enough and humble enough to look at our own negativity. That way we can begin to not let it push us around. Where we really get into trouble is when we have no idea what is going on with us internally at all. And I want to also stress, yes, you can do these kinds of exercises on your own and they can be helpful. But if one needs a therapist, one needs a therapist. And it's always, always, always important to be open to the possibility that if we need therapy, we should go into it. I don't have any problem telling all of you I've spent years in therapy. I've had different therapists. I went into analysis at one point, and it made such a huge difference. And I think others of you at other centers are probably would agree, I hope. We often encounter situations where people have problems and they come to us and we try to help them, fraternal counseling. But we should not hesitate to say to somebody, you might want to get some professional help here, because we are not necessarily able to solve all the problems that somebody might go through. And so we have to be realistic about that. And again, we're trying to help people. And thank God we live in an era where it is okay to admit I have these kinds of problems. And we have lots of resources in the modern world for getting help. So why not take advantage of them? We don't have to be ashamed about it. And it's like this. When we look at our emotional negativity, we're trying to learn to define the feelings that we have, not let those feelings define us. That's how we begin to free ourselves. Thank you very much.